Her small blue bicycle was still lying on its side when they discovered it, one wheel slowly turning under the dim, isolated glow of the single street lamp. It was a chilly November evening in 1957, and the small, isolated Illinois town of Silver Creek lay quiet under a heavy, suffocating blanket of fog. The handlebars of the children's bike pointed toward the empty darkness beyond, like a silent, terrifying question waiting for an answer. The front gate to the Miller family home stood open, creaking softly in the cold wind, but 5-year-old Susie Miller was gone. If you are compelled by cold cases where the truth manages to hide in plain sight for decades, this story is for you. This narrative will take us into corners of Silver Creek, Illinois that nobody ever expected to explore. It's a gripping tale of innocence lost, a community left haunted for generations, and dark secrets that simply refuse to remain buried. The last confirmed sighting. Saturday, November 16, 1957, began like any other crisp day ending the autumn season in Silver Creek. The harvest was officially over, and families gathered at the Carson farm on the outskirts of town to celebrate the season's final yield. It was a time-honored community tradition, a daytime picnic that stretched seamlessly into the evening, with neighbors sharing homemade pies and children playing tag between the rows of corn stubble. Little Susie Miller arrived with her parents, John and Patricia Miller, just after 3 p.m. She was wearing a warm red cardigan over her favorite checkered dress, her blonde hair neatly tied back with a blue ribbon. Susie was 5 years old, a child full of vibrant energy and endless curiosity, known to everyone in the community as the spirited little girl who loved playing hopscotch and humming church songs. As dusk began to fully settle around 5 p.m., the adults gradually moved indoors to the farmhouse kitchen for coffee and more pie. The children, still energetic from apple cider and fudge, continued their games outside under the relaxed watch of a few teenagers. Susie was last reliably seen around 5:30 p.m. chasing the Carsons' barn cat near the structure with another little girl. When that playmate's mother called her own daughter in, Susie turned and trotted back toward the main farmhouse alone, her small figure briefly visible in the lantern light before she completely disappeared into the growing shadows. By 6 p.m., Patricia Miller realized she hadn't seen her daughter in quite a while. She checked inside the farmhouse first, thinking perhaps Susie had followed some of the older kids indoors or curled up asleep under a pile of coats. But Susie wasn't anywhere to be found. A quick, increasingly frantic search around the yard and outbuildings turned up nothing of significance except the child's doll, Lucy, lying abandoned in the grass near the porch. A cold, paralyzing prickle of fear immediately ran through Patricia. The other children were accounted for. Only Susie was missing. John Miller and a few other men grabbed heavy-duty flashlights and fanned out across the farm property. They called Susie's name repeatedly into the crisp night air, momentarily expecting to find her hiding behind a hay bale or crouched in the corn rows in a game of hide-and-seek. With each passing minute, the shouts became more urgent, dissolving into panic.
A dense knot of dread was rapidly forming in every parent's stomach. Silver Creek was the classic kind of small town where children wandered safely from yard to yard. A missing child was absolutely unheard of. By 6:45 p.m., with still no sign of Susie and total darkness having fully settled in, John Miller raced into town to alert the authorities. The devastating trail of evidence. Deputy William Evans was on duty at the tiny sheriff's substation that night. He immediately followed John back to the farm, his red lights cutting sharp, alarming streaks through the fog. They instantly expanded the search area. Evans radioed Sheriff Roy Parker at home, and the sheriff arrived within the hour with 2 more deputies. Near the sharp curve of the dirt road that led from the farm back toward town, they located the first devastating piece of evidence: Susie's little blue bicycle, abandoned on the gravel shoulder.
It was tipped over as if it had been hastily dropped, one training wheel caught firmly in a rut. The discovery sent a profound chill through Sheriff Parker. It suggested Susie might have left the farm's safety and headed toward the main road. But why would a 5-year-old child set off alone in the dark? Evans' flashlight then caught another clue that hit them even harder. One of Susie's black patent leather shoes, small and scuffed from play, lying innocently in the weeds near a drainage ditch by the road. The shoelace was still neatly tied. Crucially, there were no obvious signs of a struggle. No blood, no drag marks, just an overturned bike and a single lonely child's shoe left behind under the heavy November fog. The deputies formed a disciplined line and swept the immediate area. They searched along the road, in the shallow ditches, and around the perimeter of the farm. The only sounds were the crunch of boots on the frosty grass and the distant, mournful lowing of cows from a neighboring field. "Susie!" they shouted again and again, their voices growing more desperate, but there was only silence in response, the kind of profound, heavy silence that settles like a physical weight on the heart. The grim reality of daybreak. By 9 p.m., half the town had heard the terrifying news. Neighbors left their supper dishes unfinished on the table and converged on the farm to help with the search. Some brought oil lanterns, others carried hunting rifles in case there were wild dogs in the fields. Men hollered Susie's name into dark barns and hayloft openings, while women tried their best to comfort Patricia, who was shaking uncontrollably. John Miller's face was pale and set with grim determination as he plunged into the tall cornfield with a flashlight, refusing to rest. At midnight, after hours of fruitless searching, Sheriff Parker made the agonizing decision to scale back the effort for the night. A few deputies and family members would remain by the farmhouse in case Susie somehow wandered back on her own, but the bulk of the volunteers were sent home to get some rest and return by daybreak. No one wanted to say the words aloud, but what they all feared was becoming terribly real. With each passing hour in the cold darkness, the chances of finding Susie safe were dwindling rapidly. Sunlight brought no miracle. As dawn broke on Sunday, November 17, 1957, Silver Creek awoke to the unthinkable reality. Susie Miller was still missing. The church bells at First Methodist tolled at 7 a.m., but many pews remained empty that morning. Instead, nearly the entire town gathered at the volunteer fire station, which Sheriff Parker had designated as the search headquarters. The crisp air smelled of damp leaves and wood smoke as townsfolk, bleary-eyed but resolute, assembled to continue the massive search. The trail goes coal. Sheriff Parker organized the immense effort with military precision. He divided a map of the surrounding area into distinct sectors and assigned dedicated teams to each. By 8 a.m., well over 100 people were out combing the countryside. They walked shoulder to shoulder through the harvested cornfields, where brittle stalk stubble poked through the frost. They pushed through thick tangles of brush in the nearby Silver Creek woods, a 20-acre patch of oak and maple trees now bare of leaves. Every ditch, culvert, and outbuilding within miles was checked, any place a small girl might hide or be hidden. 2 Illinois State Police troopers arrived mid-morning with specialized bloodhounds from the Springfield Canine Unit. The dogs were given Susie's cardigan sweater, recovered from the farmyard, to sniff. With their noses low to the ground, the hounds eagerly picked up her scent and led handlers down the dirt road. But the trail only carried about 30 feet past the exact spot where her bicycle was found. There, on the open road, the dogs abruptly lost the scent. One hound sat and began to whine. The handler tried again from the shoe and the bike, but the result was exactly the same. "It's like she vanished into thin air at that spot," he told Sheriff Parker grimly. The implication was instantly clear and deeply chilling. Susie had very likely been picked up by a vehicle. At this news, a grim determination settled among the searchers. No one wanted to explicitly voice the word kidnapping, but it hung heavy and suffocating in the cold autumn air. The frustrating timeline. The volunteers pressed on through the afternoon, expanding the search radius relentlessly. They left no stone unturned, wading into muddy creek beds, peering into old wells, and scouring the edges of neighboring farms. By nightfall on Sunday, despite their exhaustive efforts, they had found no sign of the little girl. Every snapped twig or scrap of cloth was scrutinized, but nothing concrete emerged. That evening, Sheriff Parker gathered the weary crowd outside the fire station. He thanked everyone for their tireless work and urged them not to lose hope. Many lingered, even after Parker reluctantly called off the formal search for the night. Farmers climbed back into their pickup trucks and swept their headlights over fields as they drove home, unable to give up. In town, porch lights burned on every house like desperate beacons, hoping to guide Susie back. Inside the firehouse, Patricia and John Miller sat huddled together, their eyes red and vacant. On the bulletin board above them was tacked a simple school photo of Susie, a gap-toothed 5-year-old grin beneath bright blue eyes, with the single word "missing" printed in bold letters. The sight of it knocked the wind out of Patricia. John put a steady hand on her back as she quietly sobbed, neither of them able to leave the station and return to a home that no longer felt whole. In the days immediately following Susie Miller's disappearance, Silver Creek was a town fundamentally transformed.
The normal, comforting rhythms of daily life ground to a halt. School remained open on Monday, but teachers tried only to maintain a routine. Little actual work was done. Sheriff Roy Parker and his small team worked around the clock. The cramped sheriff's office was immediately inundated with phone calls and walk-in tips. The first 48 hours had passed with no breakthrough, meaning every lead, however tenuous, now had to be chased down. On Monday, Parker and Deputy Evans began interviewing everyone who had been at the Carson farm that Saturday. Most recalled seeing Susie at some point, but no one remembered anything out of the ordinary. No strangers lurking at the property's edge. No cries for help when she disappeared. Suspects and alibis. Yet as people reflected on that night, a few potential sightings trickled in, creating a deeply confusing and muddled timeline. An older farmhand, Henry Jacobs, swore that around 6 p.m. he saw a man walking along County Route 6 with a little girl wearing a plaid dress. He assumed it was a father and daughter, but after hearing of Susie, he wondered if it had been her. Another resident driving home later that night claimed she spotted a small blue bicycle in the back of a passing pickup truck on the highway, the same distinctive color as Susie's, though she never got a good look at the driver. Susie's 14-year-old cousin, Karen Fisher, remembered glimpsing Susie by the farm's front gate around 5:45 p.m., speaking to an adult in a gentle, familiar tone, someone Karen assumed was a family friend in the dark. Each account was tantalizing, but none were definitive. Together, they painted a perplexing picture. If Jacobs truly saw Susie on foot with a man, she might have willingly gone with someone she trusted. The report of her bicycle in a truck suggested she was indeed taken by a vehicle, and Karen's recollection implied that the person with Susie was known to her. Sheriff Parker meticulously pinned these statements onto his timeline, trying desperately to make them align. He knew memory is notoriously unreliable under stress. The only solid facts he could rely on were the physical evidence, the abandoned bike, the lone shoe, and that critical point on the road where Susie's trail simply evaporated. Heartbreak in Silver Creek. By the end of the week, the initial frenzy of searching had slowed down, but the investigation pressed on in other ways. The state police set up roadblocks on highways leading out of the county, stopping cars to show drivers Susie's photograph. The local radio station broadcast her description hourly. 5 years old, blue eyes, shoulder-length blonde hair, missing front tooth, red cardigan, checkered dress. Tips poured in from all over Illinois, but every lead led nowhere or turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. With each passing day without answers, the community's fear and frustration deepened. On November 23rd, a full week after Susie vanished, the Springfield Register ran a front-page story, "Child Vanishes, Heartbreak in Silver Creek." Reporters descended on the town, turning the Miller family's private nightmare into regional news. John Miller, normally a reserved man, stood bravely before the press with tears in his eyes and pleaded, "Whoever has our little girl, please,
We just want her home." It was the first time anyone publicly acknowledged the awful possibility that Susie had been abducted. Under growing pressure to find answers, Sheriff Parker pursued the theory that many in Silver Creek were increasingly favoring, that an outsider had taken Susie. In a tight-knit town where everyone knew everyone, it was simply easier to believe the culprit was a stranger passing through. The suspect who walked away. Parker's attention turned to the transient workers, traveling salesmen, and drifters who might have been in the area at the time. Leads involving unfamiliar faces were followed with urgency. He and his deputies canvassed truck stops, motels, and rest areas on the highway near town. His attention compiled a list of seasonal farmhands who'd been in the region that fall. He focused on a drifter using the name James Costa, who had no clear alibi. Parker brought Costa in for a formal interrogation. The man was thin, weathered, and unusually calm under questioning. He claimed he'd been walking alone by the railroad tracks, which no one could verify. Parker noticed Costa had a scar over his left eyebrow and rough, calloused hands, details that made him seem all the more ominous as a suspect.
A search of his meager belongings turned up no evidence, and no one could place him near the farm that night. Lacking any proof, Parker had no choice but to let him go. By December, the stranger abduction theory was faltering. The FBI had quietly been consulted by this point, but without ransom demands or interstate evidence, they offered little beyond generic advice. The residents of Silver Creek were left with a deeply unsettling realization. If it wasn't a drifter or an outsider, could someone among them be responsible? Whispers began to circulate in hushed conversations that perhaps the evil came from within the community itself. The abrupt departure. Snow fell on Silver Creek in early December, blanketing the fields where footprints and tire tracks might once have been discernible. The search parties ceased, though the sheriff's department continued to patrol and investigate. Townsfolk tried to resume their daily lives, preparing for Christmas with heavy hearts. The miller's small evergreen tree stood in the front window, but its lights remained unlit. Patricia couldn't bear to turn them on. As 1957 turned to 1958, the case of Susie Miller was no closer to being solved. By February 1958, 3 months after Susie disappeared, Sheriff Parker was grappling with the very real possibility that they might never find her or the person responsible. Officially, Susie was still listed as missing, but in Parker's heart, the case had shifted to that of a probable homicide. In the absence of answers, rumors and theories multiplied. Over coffee at the diner, townsfolk traded speculations. Parker quietly investigated the theory of a hit-and-run accident, but one local bootlegger, rumored to drive those roads drunk, had a rock-solid alibi, playing cards in a tavern that night. Then an unexpected event occurred that later stirred new suspicions. In mid-February 1958, Whitaker's Hardware, a long-standing shop on Main Street, abruptly announced it was closing. The owner, James Whitaker, a respected man in his 30s and a lifelong Silver Creek resident, cited family reasons. His elderly mother in Springfield needed care.
Within a week, Whitaker had sold the store, packed up his wife and 2 young children, and left town. Silver Creek was surprised to see the Whitakers go, but nobody connected it to Susie's case. Sheriff Parker noted the departure in passing on his official log. Years of silence and a cold file.
James Whitaker had even volunteered in the initial desperate search for Susie and was widely regarded as a model citizen. At the time, there was absolutely no reason to think twice about his sudden departure. As the winter of 1958 thawed into spring, the investigation completely lost momentum. The phone at the sheriff's office rang less frequently with tips. Sheriff Parker still drove the lonely back roads some nights, looking for anything he might have missed. A flash of blue fabric in the underbrush, an overgrown path leading somewhere secret, but there was nothing. The town's attention, unwillingly, began to move on. A new school year ended and another began with an empty desk where Susie would have sat in first grade. Parents in Silver Creek held their children tighter now. The sense of easy, pervasive safety that once defined the community had been profoundly shaken. Patricia and John Miller continued to gently push for answers. Every morning, John walked to the sheriff's office on his way to work and simply asked, "Anything new?" Parker's pained expression was always answer enough. Patricia kept Susie's bedroom exactly as it was that November day. The dolls arranged on the shelf, the bed neatly made with her favorite teddy bear atop the pillow, as if preserving it might somehow bring her daughter back. They prayed, they waited, and they wept in private. By the fall of 1958, a full year after Susie's disappearance, the case had gone cold. It remained officially open, but without fresh leads or evidence, it sat, gathering dust. Sheriff Parker, haunted by the failure, would frequently revisit the file, flipping through the witness statements and evidence photos for the 100th time. He promised the Millers he would never give up, but each passing week made it harder to keep that promise. Little did anyone know, the first real breakthrough in the case was quietly lying in the dark woods, just a couple of miles from where Susie's trail had ended, waiting patiently for spring and a chance discovery. A heartbreaking discovery. April 1962 finally brought an answer nobody expected. More than 4 years after Susie vanished, a local farmer clearing land at the edge of Silver Creek Woods uncovered a small human skull and jawbone, barely 2 feet beneath the soil. Sheriff Parker and the county coroner rushed to the scene, their hearts in their throats. Scattered by time and animals, the remains were clearly those of a young child. The bones were immediately sent to the state lab in Springfield for forensic analysis. By mid-May, the forensic report returned. The skeleton was that of a female child around 5 to 7 years old, and the burial likely occurred around 1957. There were no obvious signs of injury on the bones, and the cause of death was undetermined due to advanced decomposition. Crucially, the child's teeth showed 2 tiny fillings that precisely matched dental work Susie had done not long before she disappeared. The evidence strongly suggested the remains were Susie's, but given the technological limits of the 1960s, experts stopped short of a definitive identification. Officially, the files still listed the remains as Jane Doe, probably Susie, but not confirmed. For the people of Silver Creek, and especially the Miller family, there was no such hesitation. They believed their little girl had finally been found, tragically silencing any faint hope that she might somehow still be alive.
closure and the weight of failure. In June 1962, the town gathered for a somber funeral at First Methodist Church. A small casket was lowered into a grave at Silver Creek Cemetery, and a headstone was placed beside Susie's late grandparents, reading, Susan Susie Miller, 1952 to 1957, gone but not forgotten. Patricia and John Miller wept as they finally said goodbye to their only child. Sheriff Parker felt a bitter mix of relief and regret.
The grave site lay within an area they had desperately searched back in '57, yet they had somehow missed it. It was a haunting reminder of how close they had been, and how far. The case was now officially reclassified as a homicide, but with no suspects or leads, it grew cold once again. Parker stayed on the job as long as he could, but by 1963 he retired, his health and spirit worn down by the weight of his failure. A new sheriff took over, and life in Silver Creek gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. Still, Susie's file remained open in the records, and her fading photograph stayed pinned to the bulletin board at the sheriff's office. The decades passed. The years turned into decades, and Susie's disappearance passed into local legend. The school children who once searched for their playmate grew up and told their own kids cautionary tales about staying safe. At the sheriff's office, Susie's case file remained officially open but inactive, gathering dust in a box. Each November, the town would pause and remember that little girl who never came home. The Miller family bore the heaviest burden. John Miller died in the late 1960s, some said of a broken heart, never knowing what became of his daughter. Patricia Miller, despite her grief, never truly gave up hope for answers. She wrote tireless letters to state authorities and anyone who might listen, urging them not to forget Susie's case. By 2005, Patricia Miller was 73 years old and in fragile health. That year, she passed away peacefully in her sleep, having spent nearly half a century awaiting the truth about Susie. Patricia was laid to rest beside her husband and daughter, with no answers on earth, a heartbreaking footnote to an already tragic story. Modern forensics and a new start. Retired Illinois State Police Detective Arthur Lewis could never forget Susie's case. In 2008, over 50 years after the disappearance, he persuaded Sheriff Dan Coleman of Macoupin County to re-examine the evidence with modern forensics. With funding from a new cold case initiative, Susie's remains were exhumed and sent for DNA testing. Technicians managed to extract a genetic profile from her bones, and a sample from one of Susie's maternal relatives was obtained for comparison. The results came back in September 2008, a 99.8% certainty that the Jane Doe found in Silver Creek Woods was indeed Susie Miller. The positive identification, after decades of uncertainty, jolted the investigation back to life. Sheriff Coleman announced that Susie's case was now officially a homicide and would be pursued with fresh eyes. Detective Lewis set up a workspace with all the old files, determined to finally uncover the killer. He spent countless hours poring over every page of the reports and logs that had sat untouched for years. It was during this meticulous review that he found something extraordinary, a clue quietly tucked away that everyone had previously overlooked. The anonymous letter. At the bottom of one evidence box was an unopened manila envelope marked Letter, December 1958, Anon Tip. The paper inside was severely yellowed with age. Unfolding the letter, Lewis discovered it was typewritten entirely in block capitals, the kind of disguised print one uses when trying to conceal their handwriting. His pulse quickened as he began to read the words, dated December 3rd, 1958, over a year after Susie disappeared. Sheriff, I have information regarding the disappearance of little Susie Miller. I have stayed silent out of fear, but cannot bear it on my conscience any longer. On the night of November 16th, 1957, I saw Susie in the company of a man she appeared to know well. This was near the old Hill Creek Bridge on County Route 6 around 6:15 p.m. They seemed to be arguing, or she was upset. It was hard to tell from a distance. The man's voice carried, and I recognized it. He is someone this town trusts, a man with a family, not a stranger. I saw him lift the child into his arms. She was kicking, possibly resisting. I didn't intervene, thinking it was a father disciplining an unruly kid or something. But now I believe he was harming her. I will not name him outright because I fear retaliation. But ask yourself why a respected man in our community suddenly left town a couple months after the incident, and what lie he told his wife about that night. Look for the one who departed unexpectedly. The truth is there if you seek it. A concerned citizen. The unmasking of James Whittaker Lewis read the anonymous letter 3 times, the hair on his arms rising. Someone claimed to have essentially witnessed Susie's abduction and was trying to point a finger at the culprit, a respected local man with a family who had left town abruptly after she vanished. It was shocking that this tip had sat in a file for decades without action. The implications of the letter were jaw-dropping. A respected local man with a family who left town suddenly after November 1957. Instantly, Lewis thought of James Whittaker, the hardware store owner whose abrupt departure in early 1958 had always been town gossip. Lewis dug into the archives. He recalled from interviews that Whittaker and his family had indeed been at the Carson Farm picnic the night Susie disappeared. They had attended in the afternoon and left relatively early, around 5 p.m., supposedly because one of their children wasn't feeling well. That timeline fit with the letter's description of a man leaving with Susie around 6:15 p.m. Lewis picked up the phone and started tracking down anyone connected to James Whittaker. One of Whittaker's old store clerks, Alan Barnes, now 79 and living in Springfield, was willing to talk. Barnes remembered how strangely Whittaker had behaved in late 1957. The man was jittery, lost weight, and then suddenly insisted on moving. He told me he'd made a mistake he couldn't undo, Barnes recalled. Every detail pointed more strongly to James Whittaker.
a trusted businessman, church deacon, little league coach, exactly the type of man no one would have suspected, who happened to leave town right after Susie's death. The confession. Whitaker was still alive, in his mid-80s, living in a retirement facility in Springfield. Detective Lewis knew confronting an elderly suspect with a 51-year-old accusation would be delicate. In March 2009, Detective Arthur Lewis and Sheriff Dan Coleman visited 84-year-old James Whitaker. Whitaker was frail and battling Parkinson's disease, but his mind was sharp. At first, he repeated the same polite story about moving away to care for his sick parent. However, when Lewis produced a copy of the anonymous 1958 letter and calmly laid out the accumulated evidence, Whitaker's demeanor shifted. Tears welled in his eyes. Knowing he had been cornered by the truth, Whitaker broke down and, against his attorney's advice, chose to confess. He admitted that he had developed an unnatural fixation on little Susie, who was a friend of his own daughter. On the night of November 16, 1957, temptation overpowered him. After taking his family home, he lied to his wife that he needed to return to the farm to retrieve a forgotten jacket. In reality, he went back looking for Susie. He found her by the farm's front gate. Because she knew him as Mr. Whitaker, her guard was down. He offered to walk her home, assuring her that her parents had requested it. Susie willingly accompanied him down the dark lane. When they neared the Old Hill Creek Bridge, Susie grew uneasy and began asking for her mother. Whitaker choked up as he described the moment things went horribly wrong. The child started to cry and pull away, realizing something was amiss. Panicking that someone might hear her screams, Whitaker clamped his hand over Susie's mouth to silence her. In doing so, he unintentionally smothered her. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he whispered, eyes overflowing. But it was too late. Justice, 51 years late. Overwhelmed by shock and guilt, Whitaker acted to cover up his crime. He carried Susie's body to his car, which he had parked in a secluded spot, and drove deep into Silver Creek woods. There, he hastily dug a shallow grave with his hands, covering the site with dirt and leaves. He disposed of her second shoe and some other small belongings along the roadside to confuse the investigation. He even joined the volunteer search the next day, all the while knowing exactly what he had done. He confessed that he left Silver Creek in early 1958 largely to flee his own conscience. He also admitted that he had confided in his close friend and employee, Alan Barnes, vaguely admitting he had done something terrible. Barnes, equally shocked, helped Whitaker better conceal the gravesite a week later, adding more soil and brush to ensure it wouldn't be found. Following the confession, James Whitaker was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Given his age and frail health, he pleaded guilty to lesser charges and was sentenced to spend the remainder of his life in medical incarceration. "I have been in a prison of guilt for 50 years, he told the court. In July 2009, James Whitaker died of pneumonia in the prison hospital. Alan Barnes, confronted shortly after Whitaker's confession, confirmed his role in helping hide the crime. Due to his age and the extraordinary passage of time, he received a suspended sentence for being an accessory
and obstructing justice. Healing and remembrance. When the news of Whitaker's confession broke, Silver Creek reacted with a whirlwind of emotions: shock, anger, sorrow, and a strange kind of relief. For older residents, it was a staggering betrayal.
Parents who once let their kids ride their bikes to his store now shuddered at the realization that the wolf had been among them all along. After 52 years, the town's great unsolved tragedy finally had an answer. The community organized a memorial service for Susie on November 16, 2009, exactly 52 years to the day since she vanished. The First Methodist Church overflowed with people. The pastor reminded everyone, justice delayed does not mean justice denied. He praised the perseverance of all who had never forgotten Susie, mentioning the late Patricia Miller, whose relentless faith had finally been vindicated. Detective Arthur Lewis spoke, emphasizing that it was the community's love for Susie that kept the search for answers alive for so long. He expressed his regret that John and Patricia Miller did not live to see this day, adding gently, "Perhaps they know the truth now, in a higher place, and can rest in peace together." At the Silver Creek Cemetery, a new inscription was added to Susie's gravestone, commemorating the year she was identified, 2008, and the year her killer was exposed, 2009. Adding the Bible verse, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Retired Sheriff Roy Parker, now in his 80s, approached the grave and placed a single white rose on the cold marble. He rested a trembling hand on the headstone and whispered an apology only he could hear. He had carried the weight of Susie's case his entire life. With the truth known, that weight finally lifted. The story of Susie Miller stands as a stark reminder of the dual nature of small-town life, the closeness and trust that bind a community, and the unfathomable harm that can be hidden behind a familiar face. Silver Creek learned the hardest lesson of all, that monsters don't always come from faraway places. Sometimes they live among you. The resolution was bittersweet, bringing profound relief, but also enduring sorrow for the life that was stolen. The playground named in Susie's honor still rings with children's laughter, but at its entrance stands a plaque telling Susie's story, ensuring she is not forgotten and reminding everyone that vigilance and care are the price of protecting our loved ones. In the end, the truth found its way home. We hope this case gave you chills and insight. If you found this story compelling, please be sure to like and leave a comment below. And if you want to keep exploring cold cases like this one, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. We'll see you in the next video.